We try to start this video a dozen different ways. But honestly, the simplest one is the truth. To explain the genius, the mystery, and the sheer power of the ninja, you have to forget almost everything you think you know. Because the ninja you picture, the masked figure in black, the spinning sword, the flying stars, that man is a fantasy. A costume invented for the stage and the screen. The real ones were far stranger. Silent, invisible spies and saboteurs who shaped the wars of an entire empire, and who were so good at hiding that, even today, we can't be completely sure they existed at all. In the next 20 minutes, you'll meet a real shinobi. Watch how he was built almost from birth. Follow him on a single mission that reads like a James Bond film, and uncover why the truth is wilder than any movie. Stay until the end. The final secret may be the strangest part of all. Meet Kaito Mochizuki, a ninja. He lives in a small village called Kōga, a couple hundred miles from the capital, Kyoto. The year is 1490. Look around Kaito's home, and you'll see the most ordinary village you can imagine. People herd animals. They grow rice. On cold evenings, they sip sake, swap stories, and play card by the fire. But there's something odd about Kōga. Even the most hardened bandits in Japan are terrified to set foot here. And powerful lords keep sending Kaito's family expensive gifts. Why? Because the entire village of Kōga is populated by ninja. Every household, including the women, who trained and worked exactly like the men. There were two legendary homelands for these shadow warriors. Kōga, where Kaito lives, and the neighboring province of Iga. Hidden in remote, mountainous country, far from prying eyes, both places became factories for the deadliest spies in Japan. And this craft was ancient. Japanese histories hint at shadow agents as far back as the 6th century, meaning that by Kaito's time, his family's profession was already 1,000 years old. To understand why that mattered, you have to understand medieval Japan's brutal class system. At the very top sat the samurai, warriors with the legal right to kill almost anyone beneath them on the spot. Below them came merchants, farmers, craftsmen, and at the very bottom, the outcasts, people treated as less than human. A rigid ladder, and everyone knew they're wrong. But here's what made the ninja unique. In that strict feudal order, they belonged to no class at all. They existed outside the system entirely. That freedom was their superpower. Kaito, like every shinobi, lived apart in his own village and could be anyone he wanted to be. Most ninja spent their ordinary lives pretending to be farmers. Some posed as merchants. The truly skilled could even pass themselves off as samurai, whatever the mission required. Kaito belongs to the Mochizuki family, and that family belongs to something legendary, the alliance of the 53 families of Kōga, a tiny hidden state of spies named after this very village. And the Mochizuki name carries a real secret of its own. History records a woman named Mochizuki Chiome, who is said to have trained an entire network of female ninja, orphans and shrine maidens who could go anywhere, hear anything, and report back without ever being suspected. They were called kunoichi, a traveling priestess, a servant girl, an entertainer. No guards searched them. No lord watched his tongue around them. In a world of armored men, the most dangerous spy in the room was often a quiet woman in the corner. And Kōga still exists today. It's a real city in Japan, where one of the main attractions lets you live a day as a ninja. Though, fair warning, it has almost nothing to do with reality. They hand you a tight black suit, let you throw some shuriken, and run an obstacle course. Goo! But the real Kaito, his family, and the 53 clans were built for something far more serious. Here's the first myth to kill. Calling Kaito a ninja isn't even correct. In his own time, people like him were called shinobi no mano, shinobi for short. The word ninja actually came later from a different reading of the same Japanese characters, the reading borrowed through China. It was that version that spread the legend of these hired killers across the world, and the name stuck. And hired killer is misleading too. A shinobi was really a scout and a saboteur. Assassination was, at best, 10% of the job. The other 90%? Reconnaissance, stealing classified plans, setting fires, poisoning water supplies, the quiet, patient work of espionage. In fact, the very heart of their craft had nothing to do with violence. The greatest shinobi could recruit a traitor inside an enemy castle, get them talking, and walk out with every secret the man knew, and the victim never even realized he'd been turned. It was the oldest trick in the world: find a man's weakness. His greed, his pride, his fear, his anger. Push the right one, and a loyal guard becomes your unwitting spy. The clowns you see in movies and at festivals share nothing with Kaito. He would have outclassed them in every single way. Because ninja weren't made, they were born. The moment baby Kaito came into the world, the training began. His parents hung his basket in the corner of the house and gently rocked it, just hard enough that the infant bumped against the walls. It sounds cruel, but it was careful and never enough to harm him. The family was building a reflex. Sooner or later, the moment the child felt that swaying motion, he would instinctively curl up to protect himself. As he grew, they spun him and tumbled him at every possible angle. After thousands of small falls, Kaito learned to land without breaking a thing. Only then did he move to the next stage. And that next stage wasn't brute strength. First and foremost, it was the mind. Reading, art, science. A ninja had to know everything. Kaito could build a bomb out of almost nothing. Like every shinobi, he mastered chemistry. He read military maps of every kind. He could decode secret documents. Above all, he was a brilliant actor. Merchant, peasant, samurai, even a low-ranking soldier. The ninja could become any kind of person to reach his goal. There was even a name for it: the 7 disguises. A wandering monk, a traveling entertainer, a merchant, a mountain priest. Each role came with its own costume, its own way of walking and talking, so Kaito could move through any province as someone no one would question. This is exactly why modern ninja schools have so little to do with real shinobi. Kaito was closer to a perfect spy than a fighter. And the famous ninjutsu? It wasn't a martial art. It was a philosophy of achieving the result by any means necessary. They learned to fight, yes, but they never dwelled on it. Why trade punches when you can simply remove the target from a distance? So the real attention went to skills that actually kept you alive, like seeing in the dark. To train his night vision, young Kaito was placed in a cave lit only by a single torch. Then the torch became a candle. Then the candle was taken away entirely. The point was simple: to make the darkness his friend, just like his legs. Because why get dragged into an exhausting brawl when you can blind your enemy and simply run? There was even a strange exercise for speed. They gave a young ninja a straw hat and had him hold it against his chest. He'd let go of his hands and start running. If the rushing air kept the hat pinned to his chest, his speed and form were good enough. And the endurance was inhuman. Kaito could swim across a river, hold his breath far longer than any normal man, and survive for days on tiny ration pills of rice flour and herbs. So he never had to risk being seen buying food. Now for the biggest myth of all, the equipment. In 90% of cases, when Kaito set off on a mission, he looked like an ordinary peasant. No black suit, no katana. Ninja basically never used the long sword for fighting in the open because it draws attention. Only samurai carry katanas. Any passerby could ask uncomfortable questions. Where did you serve? Who are you, really? Kaito's favorite weapon was the kuzurigama, a sickle on a long chain that could take off any limb, including a head. But here's the genius part. Disassembled, the kuzurigama looked exactly like an ordinary farming sickle. War raged everywhere, and every city gate had brutal inspections. A ragged peasant carrying a sickle raised almost no questions. And the shuriken, those famous throwing stars? They were real, but they were rarely meant to kill. A shinobi flung them to slow a pursuer, to buy a few precious seconds to escape. Sometimes the tips were coated in something far nastier than steel. Even the kunai, that iconic ninja dagger from every video game, was really just a humble tool, used for digging, prying, and climbing walls far more often than for stabbing anyone. The real toolkit was the work of an engineer. Spiked iron caltrops scattered behind him to shred the feet of anyone chasing. Collapsible grappling hooks, climbing claws strapped to the hands. Even folding ladders and small, hidden saws. And those iconic black costumes? In reality, Kaito and any sensible shinobi never wore them. It's foolish. Pure black doesn't help you blend into the night at all. The real night outfits were brown, ash gray, or dark gray. Those are the colors that actually dissolve into the dark. The same goes for hoods and masks. Many clans didn't even use them. The ninja's true tactic was ruthless practicality. These were men on the cutting edge of technology who happily used firearms, knuckle dusters, and tools no one else of the era had even seen. Shinobi studied every martial art that existed, but only to learn how to break it. In reality, they perfected the skills that won fights, attacking from behind, stunning a target, poisons, and brawling in tight, enclosed spaces. A modern karate champion, with all his graceful kicks and forms, wouldn't last a single minute in that kind of fight. So for 200 days out of 365, Kaito simply trained and lived the life of an ordinary farmer. Everything they knew was eventually gathered into a single, staggering book, a ninja encyclopedia called the Bansen Shuki. 22 volumes covering philosophy, strategy, weapons, weather, astrology, and the art of disappearing. Almost everything we truly know about shinobi comes from pages like these. And they were feared enough that lords redesigned their very homes to stop them. Some castles were built with so-called nightingale floors, wooden boards engineered to chirp like a bird under the slightest footstep. In a world of silent intruders, a floor that sang was a deadly serious defense. A passing European wouldn't have had the faintest idea what kind of village Kōga was. But every local lord knew exactly who to call when trouble came. And the system worked like this. Picture a lord in the east, named Sohei, preparing for war against a rival named Kuroda, whose fortress city sits beneath a mountain. The rumors are grim. Kuroda's army outnumbers his 3-1. Sohei sighs and sends a delegation to Kōga, loaded with gold and supplies. It looks less like an envoy and more like an armored train. Arriving in the village, the negotiators present their gifts to the respected ninja of the Kōga clans and humbly ask for help. The sum is generous. The clans agree. Kaito is summoned by the heads of his family for a briefing. The decision is made. They will strike not with armies, but with fear. They'll plant a rumor that the gods themselves are on Sohei's side, and that marching to war would be suicide. Kaito packs his things and sets off for Kuroda's city, the one braced for war. The place looks more like a fortress than a town. But would a single guard question a poor peasant in a straw hat with a sickle on his back? A simple farmer, fleeing the coming war for the safety of a walled city? Of course not. Kaito walks straight through the gates without a second glance. Inside, he checks into a crowded peasant lodging house, 100 men to a room, and casually joins the talk about harvests and the best way to plant rice. And quietly, he starts hunting for the gunpowder hill needed to set the city ablaze. To his fellow laborers, Kaito drops a story. His brother in the capital, he says, told him the local Lord Kuroda has been secretly making deals with dark spirits. And that's only the beginning. The workers carry the rumor through the city. Meanwhile, Kaito gets to work. He eliminates a merchant transporting weapons, takes his identity, and slips straight into the samurai camp. There he learns the names of the commanders, the locations of their homes, and 100 small details, all while feeding the same rumor that the men from the east are in league with the spirits. Then, with his sickle, he deals with a rival ninja from the IGA clan, hired to protect Kuroda. Because here's the brutal truth. Shinobi were often sent to fight other shinobi. He breaks into a war commander's house and steals everything. The battle plans, the troop numbers, the supply routes. And for dessert, he quietly soaks the clothing of one of the enemy generals in gunpowder, so that during the man's next public speech, Kaito can fire a single spark at him through a blowpipe. And there it is. In front of the whole city, the general suddenly bursts into flame and dies in agony. Lord Kuroda knows it was the work of shinobi, but the city only sees one thing, that these enemies are not to be crossed. The army is demoralized. Any talk of an organized war collapses. And if anyone does still plan to march, Kaito is already long gone. Home in Kōga with copies of the maps, the plans, and a full report on the enemy's forces. It reads like a Bond film, doesn't it? But this is genuinely what an ordinary day in the life of a shinobi like Kaito Mochizuki could look like. Shinobi were not the ancestors of today's belt-wearing karatekas. They were the ancestors of super-spies, Men who spread rumors, ran sabotage, and pulled off frame-ups on every level. They were centuries ahead of the society around them. And while the samurai were drowning in their code of Bushido, for the ninja, the concept of honor simply did not exist. It was only the mission, and dying on it was considered a failure. Unlike the famed assassins of the Middle East, a shinobi who died had failed. What was the point of Kaito's death if it meant the intelligence never made a home? Even the legend that ninja could walk on water has a real root. They built a kind of water shoe and small reed floats, and used hollow tubes to breathe while hiding underwater for hours. With enough skill and patience, water became just another road. But the wild tales of ritual suicide for honor? Pure MYTHaka. If Kaito had decided not to take the mission against Kuroda, nothing would have happened to him. Ninja actually preferred to avoid risky missions, to keep out of trouble. Death came only in 2 cases, betraying the clan or revealing a secret to an outsider. And in that case, the other shinobi of the clan were required to punish the traitor themselves. The secret was everything. The secret was the whole point. But the Golden Age couldn't last. In 1581, the warlord Oda Nobunaga grew tired of the independent ninja of IGA. He poured tens of thousands of soldiers into their mountains and burned the province to the ground. The slaughter shattered IGA as a homeland of the shinobi. The survivors scattered across Japan, and many of them carried their deadly skills straight into the service of a single rising power. Then comes the great irony. It was the ninja who helped the legendary lord Tokugawa Ieyasu seize control and unite all of Japan. His most trusted ninja commander, Hattori Hanzō, became so famous that a gate of the imperial palace still bears his name today. And just as quickly, with the feudal wars over, they became useless. Around the year 1600, with the country finally at peace, there were simply no more conflicts to fight in the shadows. So the new rulers turned on them. The very image of the ninja became something to fear and despise. They were hunted, driven underground, and erased from polite history. The survivors did the only thing they knew how to do. They disappeared. They legalized themselves, blending into trade, farming, and 100 other ordinary professions, hiding their skills in plain sight. And here's where that famous black costume actually comes from. In the theater, the stagehands, the people who moved the scenery, wore tight black suits to stay invisible to the audience. That theatrical costume, worn by men whose whole job was to be unseen, became the model for the ninja outfit we know from every modern film. The legend dressed itself in the clothes of a stage trick. As for the true teaching of the ninja, it died. Today, not a single school in Japan can prove it descends in an unbroken line from those original, hardcore super spies. We can say what they wore, how they fought, how they were trained. But the living chain of masters and students, the real ninjutsu, was broken and never repaired. And yet, that doesn't erase the possibility that some of them are still out there. Because the entire essence of the ninja was this, that no one should ever know whether they truly exist at all. Think about that. The most successful shinobi in history is, by definition, one whose name we will never learn. One whose mission we never noticed. One we will never, ever find. So maybe the masked man in black was never the mystery. Maybe the real mystery is the quiet farmer in the straw hat, who walked through the gate, did the impossible, and vanished without leaving a single trace behind. If this rewired how you see the ninja, do one quiet, shinobi-level thing for us, subscribe. A new story every week. Stay curious.